My name's Aron Ralston. My parents are Donna and Larry Ralston of Englewood, Colorado. Whoever finds this, please make an attempt to get it to them. Be sure of it. I would appreciate it.
Imagine being stuck in a canyon so narrow you can touch both walls at the same time. Now imagine an 800-pound boulder, the weight of a grand piano, crushing your arm against the rock. You can't move it. You can't pull free. You can't call for help. Nobody knows where you are. You have half a liter of water, 2 burritos, a cheap pocket knife, and you are going to be there for 127 hours. Most people would wait to die. Most people would give up. Aron Ralston did something else entirely. What he did to get out of that canyon is one of the most shocking acts of human survival ever recorded. So shocking that when doctors first saw him, they couldn't believe he was still alive. This is that story. To understand what Aron Ralston did in that canyon, you first need to understand who he was going in. Aron wasn't lost. He wasn't inexperienced. He wasn't some reckless tourist who wandered into the wilderness without a clue. He was a 27-year-old mechanical engineer who had graduated from Carnegie Mellon University. Brilliant, methodical, physically fit. A man who had spent years climbing some of the most dangerous peaks in America. He had already summited 49 of Colorado's 53 14ers mountains over 14,000 feet, most of them solo, many of them in winter. He was working toward becoming the first person to climb all 53 alone and in winter conditions. This was not a man who didn't know what he was doing. But Aron had a habit, a dangerous one. He didn't tell people where he was going. Not his family, not his friends, not a single person. He would just leave, pack his gear, jump in his truck, and disappear into the wilderness for days at a time. It had always worked out before. He was experienced enough. He knew what he was doing. On April 26, 2003, he drove out to southeastern Utah. The destination? Blue John Canyon, a slot canyon, so narrow in places that you have to turn sideways to squeeze through. Part of Canyonlands National Park. Remote, beautiful, technically demanding. He planned to ride his mountain bike to the canyon entrance, hike through the slot, rappel down a 6-5-foot drop at the end, and loop back to his truck. A solid day's adventure. He told nobody. He left no note, no route plan, no expected return time. Just a man, alone, walking into one of the most isolated pieces of terrain in the American Southwest. The first part of the hike was perfect. Blue John Canyon is genuinely beautiful. The sandstone walls glow red and orange in the Utah sun. The slot sections are cool and shadowed, the rock carved into smooth, flowing curves by millions of years of water. Aron moved through it comfortably, confidently. This was his element. Around 2:41 inches the afternoon, he reached a section of the canyon about 3 feet wide and 10 feet deep. To descend, he used a large boulder wedged between the canyon walls as a foothold, stepping on it to lower himself down. The boulder moved. In a fraction of a second, 800 pounds of sandstone shifted, fell, and slammed into his right forearm, crushing it against the canyon wall. The sound must have been horrific. The pain must have been immediate and total. Aron tried to pull free. He couldn't. The boulder had wedged itself perfectly, impossibly perfectly between the 2 canyon walls, his arm pinned beneath it. He pushed. He pulled. He tried every angle. Nothing. He was 30 meters below the canyon rim. The slot was so narrow that even if someone had walked along the edge above him, they might not have seen him. Blue John Canyon sees maybe a handful of visitors per week, sometimes fewer. And nobody, not one single person on Earth, knew he was there. He looked at his supplies. Half a liter of water, 2 burritos, a small digital video camera, a cheap multi-tool with a 2-inch knife blade. He looked at the boulder. He looked at his arm, and he understood immediately and completely what this situation was. He was going to have to get himself out, or he was going to die in this canyon. Day 1 had just begun. The first day, Aron did what any engineer would do. He tried to solve the problem. He rigged up ropes to his harness and tried to create a pulley system to lift the boulder. It didn't budge. 800 pounds of rock laughed at his ropes. He tried chipping at the boulder with his knife. Sandstone is hard. His blade was dull, 2 inches long. After hours of work, he had made almost no visible progress. He tried chipping at the canyon wall instead, trying to carve out enough space to pull his arm free. Same result. He tried everything his engineering mind could come up with. Every angle, every mechanical advantage, every trick. Nothing worked. At night, the canyon dropped to near freezing temperatures. Aron had no sleeping bag. He pressed himself against the rock wall and tried to generate warmth through movement. He barely slept. By day 2, he had started rationing water. Half a liter sounds like almost nothing because it is almost nothing. In the desert heat, a working adult needs 2 to 3 liters per day. Aron was getting a few sips. He began eating his burritos slowly, tiny bites at a time, stretching them across days. On the 3rd day, he made a video recording, speaking directly into his camera as if leaving a message for his family. He gave his name, his parents' names, their address. He described where he was and what had happened. He was preparing for the possibility that someone would find his body. He also picked up his knife and tried to cut into his own arm. He couldn't do it. Not yet. The blade was too dull to cut through skin efficiently, and something in him, something deep, wasn't ready for what he knew might be coming. By day 4, he had run out of water entirely. He did what humans have done throughout history in desperate situations. He drank his own urine. He described the taste later: warm, salty, disgusting. He forced it down anyway because the alternative was dying faster. On day 5, delirious with dehydration, he carved 3 things into the canyon wall above his trapped arm. His name, Aron. His date of birth, OCT 75. His presumed date of death, APR 2003. He didn't expect to see another sunrise. Physical survival is one thing. Mental survival is another entirely. The canyon was narrow enough to touch both walls simultaneously. The sun only reached Aron for a few hours each day, moving across the slot above him in a thin strip of light, then leaving him in cold shadow. He couldn't lie down. He couldn't sit comfortably. He stood, or leaned, or hung from his ropes to relieve the pressure. For 127 hours. He began hallucinating on the 4th day. The dehydration and exhaustion had reached a point where his brain was producing its own reality. He saw his friends. He saw his family. He saw himself at a party he had been invited to before the trip, laughing, drinking, completely fine. He would reach out, and the vision would dissolve. But then something shifted. In one hallucination, he saw a small child, a boy, maybe 3 years old. The boy ran toward him, and Aron picked him up. He could feel the weight of the child in his arms, the warmth of him. And the boy's right arm, where Aron's arm was being crushed, was missing. Just a rounded stump, healed over cleanly. Aron believed, at that moment, that he was seeing his future son. A son he had not yet had. A son who existed in a version of the future that only happened if Aron survived. He later described this vision as the moment everything changed, as the moment he stopped thinking about whether he would survive and started thinking about how. The answer had been there all along. He had been refusing to look at it directly, but now he looked. On the morning of the 6th day, Aron woke up and noticed something about his arm that changed everything. It had started to decompose. Without circulation for nearly 5 days, the tissue in his trapped forearm had begun to die. The smell was unmistakable. The skin had changed color. The arm below the boulder was no longer really part of him. It was already gone in every way that mattered. And with that realization came another one, sharp and sudden as the crack of a bone. He could break it. The radius and ulna, the two bones in the forearm, could be snapped using torque against the boulder. He had the leverage. He had the position. He had known for days that amputation was the only way out. But he had thought his knife couldn't cut through bone. He was right. It couldn't. But it didn't need to. If the bones were already broken, the blade only needed to cut through skin and tendon, soft tissue. That his dull 2-inch knife could do. What came next is almost impossible to describe. Aron Ralston braced himself against the canyon wall, twisted his body, and snapped both bones in his forearm against the boulder. He described the sound as a snap, followed by a feeling of sickening release. The bones broke cleanly. End quote. Then he picked up his knife. What followed took about an hour. 1 hour of cutting through his own arm with a blade barely sharper than a butter knife in a canyon in the middle of the Utah desert, completely alone. He fashioned a tourniquet from the tubing of his Camelback hydration pack to slow the bleeding. He cut through the skin, through the muscle, through the tendons, the toughest part, which required him to use the pliers on his multi-tool. At 11:32 a.m. on May 1st, 2003, exactly 127 hours after the boulder had trapped him, Aron Ralston pulled his arm free. He stood up. He was alive. Here is what most people don't realize about Aron Ralston's story. Cutting off his arm was not the end. It was the beginning of the next phase of survival. He was still deep inside Blue John Canyon. He still had to rappel down a 6'5" sheer rock face with one arm after 5 days without water, having just lost 25% of his blood volume. He still had to hike approximately 8 miles back to his truck through the desert heat. He did all of it. He rappelled the wall. He hiked through the canyon. He found a small pool of rainwater collected at the base of a rock face and drank from it on his knees, not caring what was in it. He kept moving. After about 6 miles, he encountered something he hadn't expected. People. A Dutch family, Eric and Monique Meyer, and their son Andy, were on vacation in the area. They had been following the trail when they came around a bend and found a ghost, a gaunt, blood-soaked man with a stump where his right arm should have been, walking calmly toward them through the canyon. They gave him food and water. Monique and the son ran ahead to find help. Eric stayed with Aron. A search and rescue helicopter, which had been deployed after Aron's family finally reported him missing, was already in the area. It found him approximately 4 hours after he had cut off his arm. He had lost 40 pounds. He had lost 25% of his blood volume. He was severely dehydrated and close to organ failure. He was also, somehow, calm, lucid, aware. The paramedics couldn't believe he was still talking. Aron Ralston recovered. He went back to climbing. In 2005, 2 years after cutting off his own arm, he became the first person to summit all of Colorado's 53 14ers, solo, in winter, with one arm. He wrote a book called Between a Rock and a Hard Place. In 2010, Danny Boyle turned it into the film 127 Hours, starring James Franco. The amputation scene was so realistic that audience members fainted at film festivals. It holds a 93% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But here's the thing about Aron's story that most people miss. His biggest mistake wasn't going into the canyon alone. His biggest mistake wasn't failing to bring more supplies. His biggest mistake, the one that almost killed him, was not telling a single person where he was going. He said it himself afterward. In the hallucination with his future son, he realized the one thing that would have prevented all of it was a single text message, a note on the kitchen table, 30 seconds of communication. That's it. He lost an arm because of 30 seconds of communication he chose not to have. He talks about this in every speech he gives. Not to scare people away from the outdoors. He loves the outdoors more than ever, but because the lesson is bigger than hiking. Tell people where you're going. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them when to expect you back. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple. But Aron Ralston will tell you, from personal experience, that it is the difference between a great adventure and 127 hours alone in a canyon, carving your own name into the rock above a date you expect to be your death. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you. Aron's story is one of the most extraordinary acts of human will ever documented, and it happened to an ordinary man, on an ordinary Saturday, in a canyon that looked perfectly safe. Subscribe to Impossible Survival, because survival isn't just a story, it's a reminder of what humans are truly capable of.